Okay, welcome everyone to the Environmental Services Committee meeting. I'll declare the meeting open at 10:03 a.m. and apologies for the slight delay as we get organised. So I'll just call for apologies. No apologies. Okay, I'll move on to identification of items of urgent business. Are there any urgent business items, Councillor Piddington?
Yes.
Your microphone, Councillor Piddington, sorry.
On for me. On my own. I'm not sure whether here or later on, but I just want to note that I'm going to oppose the investigation into the variation of proposed district plan on urban growth going public excluded. I think. Well,
Yep. Yeah.
I just think there's three main reasons. The ratepayers.
Sorry, I might just hold you right there. That's okay. We might just deal with that when we get to that item on the agenda, if that's all right. Sorry.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. That would be great. Any other items of urgent business? Items of minor nature? There's just one I wanted to raise, which I'm in two minds about, but there's been a lot of legislative changes coming out of government recently, and I had talked to Mr. Cooper about perhaps having a report summarising what those major changes are and how they affect council. However, given there's an election in October, I'm not sure if that's of value or not, so I just wanted some guidance from the committee on whether we think that's worth doing.
Really, I think it's better to wait till after the election, because you might send the officers away to produce the report, then on October's turned on its head, so that would be my suggestion.
Thanks. Any other, Councillor Bull?
Minor nature, City Hub. I'd like to have a discussion about that.
City Hub and Infrastructure Committee. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so we won't talk about that in minor nature anyway. It's all right, Ruthie. Okay, so moving on. Any other minor nature items? No, so none of them. Declarations of conflicts of interest? No. Okay, so the Chair's report, I've got a pretty short report. Council's been really busy with council meetings and workshops, but outside of those normal meetings, since our meeting in July, I attended an OTOP meeting in August, and yesterday actually went on a field trip to the Waipopo Lagoon to see in person the joint project that DOC is leading, establishing native planting in the 44 hectare reserve there, which is really great to see. There is a concern not only with that project but with a number of others that when the Jobs for Nature funding dries up, what the future of those projects look like, which is why OTOP was out there. And I also met with Council Officer Reece Taylor and Independent Advisor Dr Phil Driver to discuss the climate change strategy progress that we're going to have a report on very shortly, so I look forward to that, and attended the joint local alcohol policy committee meeting. So that's what I've been doing. If there's any questions on any of that. No, if not, I'll move my report and ask for a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Parker. All in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, so we'll move to the confirmation of the minutes from the Environmental Services Committee meeting held on the 25th of July, which was chaired by Councillor Jackson. So the recommendation is that the minutes of the Environmental Services Committee meeting held on the 25th of July be confirmed as a true and correct record of that meeting, and the chairperson's electronic signature be attached. Could someone move that? Thank you, Mayor Bowen, and seconded Councillor Shannon. Thank you very much. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So we'll move on to the reports, and I'm just going to make a minor change to the order of these reports and start with 7.2, which is the, sorry, Mr Taylor, I've got to give you warning of that. We'll start with 7.2, which is the climate change response, and then we'll deal with the actions register after that because they're actually related to one another. So I'll just welcome Mr Taylor up to present his report. Thank you.
We're on. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you. One quick item to begin. I recall from the previous meeting you were interested to know what impact the forestry might be having in terms of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's very easy for us to concentrate only on our emissions. Well, I've been doing some work with Craig, our new forestry officer, and we have some as yet unaudited estimates of the value to us of the forestry in absorbing carbon dioxide over the period of the year that we're doing our carbon footprint on. And at a rough figure, 6,486 tonnes of carbon dioxide are being absorbed by that forestry in the past financial year, subject to an audit, but we'll be able to include that in our carbon footprinting. So it's nice to have a little bit of positive alongside the otherwise perhaps negative. The report that I presented to you is just a brief one, 2 pages, but with some visual material alongside it. And because I know how long your meeting is, or series of meetings will be during the day, may I take the report and the images alongside it as read, because you've had a chance to look through that. I'd welcome your questions about it, and I've got a couple of comments that I could make about the report as well, but I'm very happy, Madam Chair, to proceed direct to questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Do you want to start with your comments and then we'll open up with questions, if that's okay with you?
The context for this work is related quite closely to some very good public engagement activity during the last financial year. This was coordinated for us by an independent worker, a facilitator, and the public engagement in that was really encouraging. We literally had hundreds of people involved in the participation. Several councillors have been along, so you've had a chance to see them firsthand. The job is not completed. It's made very good progress, and the first report on the climate strategy for the district gave us some really good pointers which we're going to use within our own internal work, but there's still more to be done. And so I'm in a position as a worker focused mainly on the internal activity of really welcoming that external contact and that bringing of public interest and focus on climate issues. It would be splendid to be able to continue that. But I'm in your hands as councillors, and also that of my senior colleagues, as to the commitment to how much we invest in that and if we invest in that. But I wanted to record my concern that the momentum we've started is faltering, and it seems disappointing to have that momentum faltering. In terms of the content of the work, we will be able to be underway on our internal planning as part of the activity plans, building towards the long-term plan for the District Council, so that our response to climate change, both in adaptation and mitigation, can begin. And it's given us the platform for that work. We're also going to connect with work happening across the whole region. There's a mayoral working party on climate issues in which our committee chair and our mayor are both involved. And that regional working group is timed in such a way that we can make use of it and it can make use of our experiences. So there'll be a dialogue between us and our neighbouring councils and the rest of the region. That gives us an opportunity to keep the context. You may have come across the public communications called It's Time Canterbury, saying there's an issue for all of us here. An opportunity for us to connect our work with the work happening across the region. To some extent, we're ahead of our colleagues in other councils because we've done the external strategy work. There'll be other ways in which, no doubt, experience elsewhere, particularly in the larger settlements, is ahead of us because they've had more staff and more time to work on their climate planning. But we're in the game. I'll stop at that, Madam Chair.
I think, yeah, the other point too, because we do have an election coming up too, and a change in government could easily change the national focus as well. So we are acutely aware of that.
Sure, thank you. Any questions from councillors? Councillor Booth?
You mentioned the 6,486 tonnes of carbon that's been sequestered by the trees. What happens at the end of their life? Is that released back into the atmosphere, that carbon?
The question is a fair one, because if you log and remove all those trees and turn it into pasture, then yes, you've got an effect in terms of you're losing your carbon storage. But much of the forestry grown here is intended to be replanted, and it will either be replanted as further conifer forestry, or it will be planted or allowed to regenerate as native bush, which also stores carbon. So we can note the benefit that there's carbon storage going on, but if we were to log and clear the whole lot, or some disastrous weather event felled the whole lot, then we would have a loss. And the carbon credits that were banked when we first registered this forestry, the pre-1990 forest, those carbon credits are there to help insure us against that risk. So we do have some carbon credits that we can use for that purpose.
I guess what I'm getting at is what's the point? Because you're actually basically storing them, and then they're going to ultimately die, or you're going to cut them, and that tonnage you've sequestered goes back into the atmosphere. So what's the point?
I missed your comment, Mr. Councillor Burt, sorry.
Sorry, I suppose it's that principle of it. It's not storing it; it's processing it, as opposed to once you cut it down, it's returned to the atmosphere.
Depends on what happens to that timber. If the timber is used, for example, in building construction or in some other durable use, then you're not releasing it to the atmosphere. Obviously, if you burn it or you put it into your landfill, then yes, you're turning it into gases. It's all to do with flows and balance. There's a flow of some carbon from the atmosphere into the forestry on our land, which would not be happening if it was a different land use.
Any other questions, Councillor Shannon?
Thank you. I'm most interested in some of the actions around resilience and what's obviously happening right here and now. And when we don't have to look too far back to some of the flooding around, in particular around the ward in which I live. This is what it's quite handy to have both infrastructure and yourself here, actually, Reece. How much work has already been done or is going to be done, most urgently, I suppose, really, with regards to the some of the residential aspects of where our streams are through some of our towns and the lights, and are we just going to see more reports about this, or are there going to be actions specifically that are going to help some of our people to avoid some of those things like we've seen around the country where we've had to buy out properties and the likes?
Yeah, we are doing quite a bit of work through the district plan, the new proposed district plan in that area regarding flooding. So overland flow paths are now taken into account, and we do, we model every development that comes in, we model it and see what the floor height should be, the minimum floor height, to protect those properties against, or houses in particular, against flooding. So that is, there is of course coastal erosion going on. That is really, we're working with ECAN on that one. And I think at some stage in the future we will have to have some sort of retreat strategy, potentially, as the erosion occurs. So that has certainly been in discussion at the moment. There's no plan as such, but we are aware of that issue. Yeah.
So we're going to see some of this come through in time for what we're working on with the LGP right now. Again, just focusing residential on the coastal erosion and what have you. Everybody's been well aware of that, but it's the town stuff I'm concerned about at this point.
Yeah, in addition to, we're looking at our bridges, the resilience of those, where it's certainly considered in every bridge replacement program. What is the minimum height it should be above a river? So these are all sort of taken in. It's a little bit of BAU in many ways, but it's certainly that climate change consideration is definitely coming into the decision making.
Just to add to that, Madam Chair, in our work on the activity plans, which are preparation for the long-term plan, there are now useful discussions happening in the office about the climate dimension to work, which is being tackled as business as usual. Only yesterday I was having a lengthy discussion with the manager of the solid waste team about how aspects of climate awareness will be built into their waste plan. So we're trying to make this an all-of-organisation awareness.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Jackson?
Reece, you've spoken about setting up a trust as an independent entity as part of the Timaru District Climate Change Strategy. So what other trusts have been set up? Are there any other models that you're looking at, sort of exploring and maybe copying some of the good work they might have done?
We have locally at least one charitable trust which has an interest in matters of sustainability, and I believe that there's been some discussion between the mayor and the chair of that trust to see if this is part of their focus, and they've identified that while it might be interesting to do so, they've got a really full commitment of other activities. So there isn't a ready-made local body. Some of the focus on economic impacts of climate change would fall within the purview of Venture Timaru, and therefore it's one of their interests. And the Chamber of Commerce have a conference on sustainability coming up later this year, which will be touching on these issues. But there isn't a ready-made local body. And the proposal that came from the advisory group working with Dr. Driver was that, if possible, an independent trust or some such body was set up with a focus on South Canterbury, possibly inviting interest from Waimati and Mackenzie as well. It wouldn't necessarily have to be just Timaru, and that such a body could, as an independent gatherer and sharer of information, provide a useful service to us and to the wider economy and the wider society. That idea hasn't progressed very far yet, not for lack of merit, but for the energy being invested in setting it up. I mentioned earlier that I'm personally interested in this happening. Andrew.
But yeah, our initial focus is focused on looking at what council can do in regard to climate change, first and foremost, and then there is that other issue, which is what the community can do, and that's the community side is what the trust or similar entity, and it doesn't have to be a trust, and that's something we need to look at here. And the other debate that's going to be had is what level of support should council have. Potentially that's an LTP issue.
I know that within the public and the participants in that strategy work, there's an energy and impatience to keep going, and so we'd be seen to be moving slowly in comparison to their energy. So I'm personally keen that it stays on our agenda.
But climate change, of course, does tend to attract very passionate people. So.
Thank you. Any other questions from councillors? No. So I just have one question myself, Mr. Taylor. So I really appreciate that the report that you've put together. I think it clearly sets out the work that you and council are doing in this space, which is actually quite a lot. You know, and some people may feel that we've stopped with not continuing on that public working group, but I feel that we're still doing a lot. And although we don't have the supposed holy grail of a glossy strategy with fancy pictures, I can see that you've taken the work that Dr. Phil Driver and the advisory group presented and considered how we integrate that into the council's long-term plan, because any climate change strategy needs to interlink with the long-term plan. Alongside this, you're also working on council's internal response to climate change and collaborating with other councils that you've demonstrated in that report. And it seems like you're doing this without a huge amount of additional resource that was anticipated. So my question to you is, where is your time best spent if council wants to take actions that have the best outcome for our environment and our community? Sorry, that was quite a long-winded question.
Well, Madam Chair, I expect to concentrate in this month, in September, on completing that council-wide data gathering for the carbon inventory. That's our timetable for that. 2/3 of it is done. And I'll also be working on the activity plan for climate work for the council, again, to meet the internal deadlines for long-term plan briefing material. Colleagues will need that from me this month. In October, I will have the opportunity to work on the beginnings of a climate action plan for Timaru District Council. And that, again, is timed to be early enough to influence the long-term plan. It'll also begin to connect with the mayoral forum activity. So I think that time is going to be okay. We expect to receive proposals and ideas from the mayoral forum climate partnership, and they will include some ideas which will seek co-funding by all councils. So this is the mayoral forum driving this work, and the co-funding will be requested is based on population size. So Christchurch puts in an awful lot more than we do, but we look, there'll be a request there for us to take part. That will also be timed to fit into the long-term plan budget planning. Commencing in November, I'll be contributing to joint work with Environment Canterbury's coastal specialists and our emergency management team and we'll be trying to begin to offer some help to coastal communities who are most at risk from sea inundation and erosion. The work on that will take several years, but it'll be led initially by our emergency response colleagues, so that in the event of a combination of very high river flows and storm events from the sea and so on, they've got an emergency response. But alongside that, we'll be doing some work which my colleague was referring to as a managed retreat discussion, at least opening that discussion, so that their welfare and their safety is thought about in the longer term. But that will begin in November. Having some additional staff resource for climate change advice would speed up progress in most of these areas. Interested that you mentioned that. But that recruitment needs to be considered by the Chief Executive alongside other priorities for staff investment. And finally, just to reiterate my earlier point, it would be helpful to see continuation of the independently facilitated work in the wider community. That public engagement and commitment, led by the Council, or at least supported or sponsored by the Council, is a really good and powerful combination of work. And as you know, I came into this love government work from the wider community. I've been involved in non-government organisations for much of my career. I tend to have that perspective, and I'm interested in how the wider public can help us and we can help them. That's probably sufficient in terms of diary, but it's a fairly full diary, Madam Chair.
No, I appreciate that. I just actually had one follow-up question about your work with the coastal communities. Will that also involve the landowners between the two communities that are having some serious effects on their land along there, or were you thinking about just Milford and Rangitata Huts?
I think in terms of, should we say, risk to life and limb, it would be sensible for us to offer our assistance initially to Milford Huts and then subsequently to work with others. Our focus probably should be on the well-being of people, followed by the economic and the other aspects, environmental aspects. It's a very complex topic, and there are a lot of participants involved, and so it would be wrong for me to first guess what we do. The discussion with the local people is so important.
Yeah, we certainly are seeing as ECAN as a key, they'll
be
probably
involved.
are leading it, and will be in support of it, yeah.
I would just offer some support to some of those landowners and their well-being as well, because the situations they're facing out there is having a serious effect on their well-being. So I wouldn't underestimate that, would be my caution. Anyway, I think we're done with questions. Were there any further questions? I'll ask Councillor Puddington.
Yeah, look, I think we've got to focus on what we can do in this space, and the request for a second climate change officer. We need to be rigorous about these things before we create roles, and I'm not sure about an independent facilitator going back out into the community and raising expectations that we can't deliver. So I'd approach that with real caution till we as a group have decided what we want to do and how we're going to do it. Because there's a number of organisations that give good information about climate change, and I don't want to be replicating that or have someone counting numbers for the sake of counting numbers.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Puddington, and I kind of aligned with your thinking, which is why I was keen especially to make sure this is integrated with the long-term plan and we're not shooting off doing one thing and then doing another in our long-term plan. So even though it feels like we've pushed pause, it's for good reason that we make sure those are aligned. And we haven't actually pushed pause because there's still a lot of work happening, isn't there, Mr Taylor?
Just through the chair too, I think it's very important that we work very closely with the mayoral forum work and leverage off the what's going on a regional basis.
Thank you. With no further questions, I'll ask if somebody would like to move the recommendation, which is that the Environmental Services Committee receives and notes the report being the update on the Timaru climate change response. Thank you, Mayor Bowen, and do I have a second? Thank you, Councillor Oliver. All in favour, say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. I'll just actually invite both of you just to stay there if you wish, because our next report is kind of relevant that Mr Dixon may want to respond to or not. So we'll move on to report 7.1. Just bear with me while I bring that up. So this was just an actions register update. So the recommendation is just to receive a note, but There was an action from a previous committee meeting requested for the role of a second climate change officer has progressed and the scope discussed with the Mayor, Chairperson, Deputy Chair of the Environmental Services Committee. The update is there saying that a review's been undertaken on the scope, how to best resource it, and funding and priorities are also a consideration. So did you want to add anything to that, Mr Dixon, or just it is what it is?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just as previously noted, you know, when we look at new positions, we have to look at priorities across the business, and that has to be balanced up against, you know, perhaps health and safety, and finance side of things. We have a long-term plan coming up. So these things are important considerations, and I think, yeah, we also, as I was saying before, you know, leverage off other areas that can assist us rather than rushing in. Yeah, in an ideal world, lots of resources are always good. It can make the ship move faster, but is this a priority at this point in time? I would question that, and that's why we are, I guess, just undertaking that review and saying where is the priorities.
Thank you. Any questions on that? No. If somebody would like to move the recommendation. Thank you, Mayor Bowen. Anyone else? Thank you, Councillor Parker. All in favour? Against? Carried. Okay. Where are we next? So we had no items of urgent business or minor nature, so we'll move to item 10, which is the... Oh, sorry, thank you very much, Mr Dixon, Mr Taylor. Thank you. We'll move to item 10, which is the exclusion of public. So the recommendation is that the public be excluded from the following parts and proceedings of this meeting on the grounds under Section 48 of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987 as follows, and the plain English reason: to protect the commercially sensitive information, to protect all communications between a legal advisor and clients from being disclosed without permission of the client, and to prevent use of the information for improper gain or advantage. So I'll go first to you, Councillor Piddington, because obviously you have a view on this. Thank you.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, if I could.
Yes, please.
Would it be possible to invite Michael Garbutt to speak to this before we have the discussion? Michael Garbutt's a legal representative from Anderson Lloyd.
Yeah, I'm happy with that. And then, well, I can get him. Do we want to hear Stu's reasons first, or it probably doesn't matter which way round they go, does it?
It's entirely up to you, Madam Chair.
Yeah. We might just listen to Stu's reasons first, and then Michael can respond to them if he needs to, perhaps.
Yeah, look, I think being on the council, one of the things important to us is getting feedback of our ideas and where we're going to. If we take things behind closed doors, we don't get that public feedback. It's all whispers and innuendo, if you like. My understanding on this matter, the person that's brought it to us is happy for it to be discussed in public. And I guess, yeah, it's good to see open debate. And if, again, we close it behind closed doors, people don't know what's happening, they don't see our point of view, and I just don't think these reasons on this particular one stack up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Piddington. I might, unless there's any other comment, we'll just go to Councillor Booth and then I'll invite Michael to comment.
Are we going to have a discussion after the lawyer's going to say what we know what he's going to say?
I will invite Michael to comment, and then if there's further discussion, absolutely we can have further discussion. Yeah. Do you want to?
It's like the same old routine. This is what gets rolled out when there's something that's a little bit controversial. So I'm a little bit sceptical about the requirement to have the lawyer tell us what our responsibilities are.
Okay, from a new-ish councillor and new-ish chair, I actually appreciate a little bit of reassurance, but thank you, Councillor Booth, for your comments. Michael, if you don't mind just perhaps responding to Councillor Piddington's comments and giving us a bit of advice on the risks of having this in public, and actually potentially even the reasons why we could have this in public. please.
Sure. Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Just checking you can hear me okay? Yes, thank
Yes,
you.
we
Good
can.
morning. Yep, Michael Garbutt, solicitor from Anderson Lloyd, and I've certainly heard that, and I don't want to preach to the converted other than to alert you that yes, it's for council to decide whether the item is held in public or public excluded. That's fully the council's decision. The staff have put forward 3 reasons why you appropriately could hold the item in public excluded, and I do support those as reasonable. One is whether you want to hear legal advice about the procedural risks that might be involved in looking to carry out a variation. And the others are around landowner involvement or otherwise so far, and to protect the process of considering changes to people's zonings. They're reasonable grounds, but as councillors have ultimately noted, it's fully for the council to decide whether you prefer to hold the matter in public or not. The only thing I would just say is if you do it in public and you do ask for me to elaborate on any legal advice, then there's no privilege to that. It'll be provided in public, and I would say what I'd say in private in public, but you'd be waiving any legal privilege that would otherwise attach. So resolve it in
Thank you. Councillor Puddington.
public and make a decision.
So, Michael, you're more worried about the advice you might give us rather than the actual reasons for going into public excluded. Is that what I'm getting from you?
I've provided some legal advice in the report, and I'd be very happy to talk that through with you. I would say exactly the same in public as I would in private to you. That doesn't change the advice I'd give. But when we're talking about legal procedural risks to council, you're entitled to hear that in private to preserve legal privilege if you want to, but you don't have to.
Thank you. Any other comments or discussion, or is somebody wanting to put, Councillor Scott?
My view is I'm quite neutral on this. I don't have a strong view whether we go public or excluded, so I just wanted to table that. I do know I have a long list of questions around the report. I will be seeking a lot of clarification to the report, so I'm just letting you know that, yeah, I've got a long list of stuff that we need to get through, so we can do it in public or excluded, but I'm happy to go with the majority on this. It's entirely up to everyone.
Okay, any further comment? If not, can I move on?
And I've got a question, but it's around that procedural reference that Michael, referred to, where it might be best to hear it in PX. But I guess my question is around the current plan, with effectively being seen to, by considering effectively what a party's brought to us, are we picking winners, and what's the risk to council in and around the process of the district plan? I think that's what I think Michael sort of, he could answer that, but it's probably up to you, Chair, whether you want to take that. But as far as the actual paper being in PX or not, I don't really have a stronger view either, to be fair.
Okay, I think we might just put the resolution actually and see how that lands. So does somebody want to move the recommendation that public be excluded from the following parts of procedural meetings as outlined on page 10? Does anyone want to put that motion?
I'll move it's not.
So the question is, does somebody want to move the recommendation that's on the floor, on the table, whatever you call it? Which is to proceed with public excluded. So without anyone wanting to move that, the recommendation fails and we will continue in public. I think I've given everyone a fair chance to move that. So we will continue in public. Thank you, Michael, for your advice there. Okay, so we'll move on to, just bear with me while I change my agendas around. So we just have one report in this part of the meeting, which is an investigation into possible variation to proposed Timaru District Plan on urban growth, and I welcome Hamish Burrell to speak to the report. District Planning Manager, welcome Hamish.
Thank you,
Sorry,
Madam
just
Chair.
procedurally,
Yeah.
can that paper now be put online or up immediately so people that do have an interest in it can actually see what we're discussing? How does that work?
Do you know that, or shall I ask B?
Or can we distribute it round the room? Sorry.
No, my advice is we can, I'm not here to offer advice, but we can obviously upload it later, but for those members of the public that might want to view it, I think we should just take the time you've got some copies, if we just make sure that it's distributed now.
Okay, and so maybe we will just pause for 5 minutes. You're saying so I might just adjourn for 5 minutes while we distribute that. And oh no, sorry, Mr. Karen.
Just add, it's now a public item. We could just email it to anyone who's here who would like it. There's no reason why you've resolved that it go into public, so we'll just, we're going to make it public. We can, if someone wants it here, we can email it to them as well as distribute a hard copy. So just as a means of making that process efficient.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. Okay, so Mr. Cooper, did you want to say something before Mr. Burrell started with his report, or?
I was going to say there's a lot of interest in this matter. There are a lot of moving parts, and it has been a theme that's come through politically quite strongly. However, I suppose the political language doesn't necessarily translate to planning language, as we know, and it's rare that you get a yes/no answer from a planner. It's always, it depends. And that's basically, if I was going to summarise this report, I'd say that's the answer. It depends. So in that context, I'll hand over to District Planning Manager, Mr. Hamish Burrell.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. I think we talked just earlier about alignment in some context, and I think this report is interesting, and in terms of public, in terms of planning, which is often a rare thing, but it is an interesting topic of conversation, and the reason being is that it's not just about the district plan. I mean, obviously this will have consequences through other council processes as well, should we, depending upon what the decision ultimately is on this. There sounds like there's lots of questions, so we'll cut to the chase and get to those. But what I would say at the outset is 3 or 4 points. There isn't, despite looking an obvious sort of low risk through national policy as we see it, and we have looked extensively at what council could do or should do. The main route through is via the highly productive land, and there are some clauses there which I've outlined in paragraph 16, which we need to be aware of. I think those are the most relevant ones, but it's possible that there's other regional policy as well, which is important. In discussions we've had, there is a difference in expectation between infrastructure provision, what council might want to provide, and what the private sector may want to provide. And I think that's really quite an important point, because
we can talk about highly productive land, and look, that might change, it might not. But ultimately, this is an out of sequence development, and there are real cost implications ultimately in terms of the expectation. If we zone it rather than the private sector, then the onus is more on us to provide. And I've got Kevin in the background who may be able to help clarify some matters on that account. And just, I guess, the way it's been sort of put to me in terms of a proposal for housing, there's a lot of talk about affordability. And affordability is definitely a good thing. So what I would say is that option, and I haven't really outlined this in the report, but if option 1 is preferred, then it would be useful to seek some form of assurance around both the deliverability and affordability of this proposal. And without further ado, it's over to questions, I guess.
Okay, so Mr. Cooper has just suggested that we just hear quickly from Michael Garbutt on the risk to the proposed district plan process, because I'm aware that that's a massive amount of work that council is undertaking, and putting that at jeopardy is a concern, and we just need to understand that. If you don't mind, Michael.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing I really comment on in the paper, paras 12, Roman 2 and Roman 6 are the bits that I added to the report. So paragraph 12.2, risk to the proposed plan process. Really what we were just alerting you to there is that clearly you're well aware council has notified a full district plan review, and that's at submission stage and hasn't yet moved to hearing stage. If you do work up a variation and then get to the stage of notifying it, it will obviously amend provisions that are out there for submission at the moment, and it will add complexity, and whatever's varied will have to probably go on hold pending the variation to allow it to catch up and to sort of be heard together with the previous provisions, which would be substituted out. So it doesn't affect the whole district plan at all. By no means am I saying that, but any provisions around this site or relevant rules or other things that are altered by the variation would get held up to allow the variation to catch up. The only other thing I really wanted to say in terms of outcome, obviously variations kick off a public process, and they need to be weighed up with all the public submissions, all the higher order documents, and just because council notify a variation doesn't mean it's going to be successful. So, you know, it's one of those elements of doing the right work, getting the right evidence to support a variation if you wish to proceed down that path, and then notifying it, and at that point it's subject to submissions, hearing and potential appeal. So those are the main risks from a legal point of view. It's really around the process and some of those risks around whether it's actually successful or not, which you won't really know until it goes through the process. So that's what I wanted to say. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you. So I'll just take questions from Michael. Yes, Councillor Scott.
Thanks, Michael. Councillor Scott. Just with regards to that process around the district plan, I'm not sure at what part this chapter, say, of subdivisions is in our hearing schedule. I think it's quite a while off, but the risk is to the developer rather than to TDC, isn't it? Because the risk around whether they go through the proposal, the hearing process, the submissions for and against, so the risk is on them rather than to the district plan process. Is that what it's sort of a catch-22?
There's probably different layers of risk there. So if council promote a variation, that is council's variation. So you as the council would be the promoter of that change, and you'd have to be calling evidence and trying to have it approved. Ultimately, though, you're right that if council's successful, then that benefits the landowners, clearly. If council's unsuccessful, then that's probably seen to the disadvantage of landowners. But council will bear the process cost of promoting and advocating for the variation as you go through the process.
Cool, thank you. Any other questions for Michael before I open up to questions of the council officers? No, thank you. So I'm wondering, Councillor Scott, if I leave you towards the end, because somebody else might ask some of your questions other than having a big long list. So is there any other questions that anyone has? Not of the lawyer, of Hamish Burrell and the council planners and officers. Councillor Booth.
Yeah, thanks. I see you've got risks here in 12. Now, whereabouts are your benefits in the report?
Cooper, do you want to answer that?
Through you, Madam Chair. This report is brought to you to make the governing body aware of what we need to establish in order to be successful in the proposed variation. The economic benefits that may or may not exist from this would likely be some of the evidence that you produce to go towards that hearing. We don't have the information. You may get 100, 400, whatever the number is. You may get more rate takes, or you may get more rate payers, but you don't increase your revenue because the pie is still the pie. You just split the pie differently. So the economic benefits we'd have to go to an economist and have them do an assessment and come back to us with evidence based on data and projections on that data, like we did for the growth management strategy. And it's that would inform what you're asking for. So we don't have that information, is what I'm saying. We don't have anything. And we have to build that body of evidence for this variation to succeed.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up? Otherwise I'll go to Mayor Bowen. Oh, we'll go to Mayor Bowen.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Just on the theme of risk, and just interested to know if to the point made, it's our variation. So where does the cost lie in regard to provision of infrastructure in planning in general? Just interested, to understand the cost issue.
Just to try and clarify that, I don't think there's a strict liability, but the general expectation is if you're zoning land, then you would provide the infrastructure to make it work, and there will have to be presumably some give and take. And I mean, obviously, I've had a couple of discussions, and I note that there is sort of like a bit of a gap there in terms of what we've got. I think I might just let Kevin describe sort of in terms of the funding base that we have at the moment towards infrastructure and what that would entail from our point of view.
Yeah, no problem. Kevin Kemp, infrastructure planner. So our current funding is primarily from rates, right? So we don't have any sort of a development contribution policy. We do use financial contributions when they, when they best suit. So potentially when things have been designed or we have plans for new infrastructure to go in, sometimes we do use financial contributions in that case. But in this instance, we don't have anything designed yet, so it would be potentially working strictly off rates at this point. If we had development contribution policy, we could have been collecting funds since 2002, since you were allowed to set those up, and we'd have a bucket filled so that we could fund growth. growth and fund new infrastructure to service growth, but we do not have that policy in place. So at this point, it would just be rates or potentially financial contributions that we recover from the developers whenever they do their works as part of their resource consent, as part of their subdivision consents.
So we would be expected to get the infrastructure up there, more or less, wouldn't that be right?
If we were to lead the variation process, that would be that's generally the expectation.
And they would provide the infrastructure within the actual development itself. So again, this is why this is of interest, quite an interesting piece, because it has, in terms of alignment of process, sort of a broad effect across different areas of council.
Mr Dixon, I see you've come to the table. Did you want to add to that?
I think just to give a bit of clarity around this, our normal process is that the developer pays for the infrastructure within the development, and then there is provision in our district plan for financial contributions beyond that. I agree, there is an expectation that, generally those services are available to the boundary, but not always. If you take Bruffs Gully, for example, we did a lot of work in regard to planning the infrastructure there. We have a development area plan and we have financial contributions. It's set in and among that development. So when people develop, there is a bit of contributions for land, for roading, etc. that come through to help fund that. We have done similar examples up in Glenetti where we've installed truck sewers, truck water mains, and there is again financial contributions policies in place for those areas. So that all has to be done up front before this land is actually developed and will be part of a development area plan process. But otherwise, council would have to basically loan fund or rates fund the actual infrastructure.
So the intention behind the current plan is notified is that it's a FDA, so it's a future development area direction of travel. The onus or thought at the time of notification was that it would be private developer led to actually make this happen in these areas.
Just on that note, I may have misunderstood that, but with the future development area, does that exempt us from the highly productive land status or not? Are you able to comment on how those two things work together?
Yes, I can, and it's a fairly complicated question, and I'm more than happy for Michael to jump in. But to coin Mr. Cooper's phrase, it doesn't. With this particular FDA, future development area, for the most part, it doesn't where it relates to rurally zoned land. And the reason is because at the time of notification, we believed it was unlikely to come forward for more than, say, 10 years. And so the highly productive land says that in that instance it applies, and that's the reason why I've set out the pathway through. There is some land there which is currently zoned operative under the operative plan as open space, and the highly productive land does not apply to that because under the transitional arrangements in the document it's got a so-called urban zoning.
Oh, thank you. Let's go, Councillor Scott. I see you bursting.
No, I actually probably just wanted to ask a question to that though. So I wonder whether there's an opportunity, and we've just reshaped the question a little bit around, if we were to approve the investigation to this possible variation, maybe for the councillors to understand what does that actually mean. So for example, Andrew's talking about his infrastructure that would need to connect, but there's a lot of economic assessment, as you said, to be done, and it may become an unviable option for everybody. And so I feel like today we're jumping ahead and we're building all these houses. We're not. we want to continue to investigate this proposal. So I suppose I would like to hear from Hamish and Andrew, what actually is the next steps? What actually happens after today if this greenfield proposal, we ask for it to go to the next level? I'd like to know around what happens and the timeframes to that, because I think that is important for the proposed district plan too.
So from my perspective, what would have to happen is that, well, in the event that councillors wished us to proceed at pace on this, we'd probably ask a little bit of caution in terms of the impact of this on the proposed plan, because I think, as Michael's alluded to already, there, and what I can reinforce is there are some real practical implications around going forward the variation at this time. But notwithstanding that, if we were to proceed, then we would have to prepare what's called Section 32 reports, and we would have to commission consultants. We would have to have a wide range of different areas. We would probably have to look at economics. We would probably have to look at the agricultural carrying capacity. We would probably have to look at natural hazards. We would probably have to look at all of those things which probably fall under the risk that's been alluded to there, climate change, and so on. Once you've got that suite of documents and it's we believe that it can pass through the national direction that I've outlined, then we would come back to council for approval, and then it would be notified. There would be a call for submissions, further submissions, just like we've experienced through the proposed plan to date, and that would then go to a hearing. It could be that it can be circumvented back into the hearing process, but just on that, we are coming up to that milestone of, well, it's not too far down the track of the second year, so we are going to have to go to the ministry and say almost certainly that we'll need to extend the proposed plan hearings, which will move it forward. From talking to ministry officials, we'll have to have quite a detailed project plan around how much of an impact that is, and potentially consult with affected parties if effectively this results in a delay to the district plan process.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, just from an infrastructure perspective, we need to assess the capacity of the existing infrastructure. We'd probably need to do a development area plan in regards to that, to look at, how this area can be serviced in the long term. Yeah, potentially, you're looking at around $500,000, which is operating expenditure, which is unbudgeted expenditure at this stage. And part of that, we would also develop the financial contributions policy for the actual installation of the infrastructure at the time.
And Councillor Piddington, so I'll just go to Councillor Piddington and come back to you, Councillor.
I note all that, Hamish and Andrew, but it's a bit of risk and reward as a council. We're going to get more ratepayers, we're going to grow the economy and grow the district. What you've both described to me is what I thought council officers did, so we're not really asking you guys to reinvent the wheel. I mean, I just think we need to look at this, and as Councillor Scott has pointed out, we're not doing it, but we'll be in a better spot if we agree to this, to know all the steps and what it will deliver to the Timaru district, really. And, you touched on costs, Andrew. We often borrow to do these things that fall on our plate or don't, I'm sure finance isn't going to be a problem. I just think as a council, we've got a proposal that we should at least test it in some way. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, normally, what I would say is that we are proceeding with, in accordance with the proposed district plan. So we have here basically development areas 1 and 2, which is along Pages Road and down Callans Hill. And they're the first development area plans that we're preparing. So we are doing that, and that is budgeted now. What this other land you're talking about is out of sequence, effectively. So we haven't budgeted for that. We haven't planned to do that at this stage. So it's that sort of thing. And you also got to weigh up public-private benefit. Yeah, normally what plan changes are done by private developers and not the council.
I'll just go back to you, Councillor Puddington, and then Councillor Booth and Councillor Scott, I think.
Yeah, I understand it's out of sequence, but there are, Venture Timaru, we have a number of other parties have come and said we need flat, slightly cheaper land, which is something we can test. And if we can deliver that, the land you're talking about, Andrew, will either be really expensive sections or on a slope that will need individuals to put infrastructure so they can build the house on. So that's not really delivering in some ways what we want. I mean, I always find it great. We get out-of-town consultants that tell us College Road will be great, the bottom of Kanua Road, and they're just not, or else people would have built on them years ago. So here you have someone with the firepower to do something, is proposing it. I don't see why we wouldn't be at least testing it.
Thank you, Councillor Puddington. Councillor Booth, did you have another question?
Yeah, I guess I have. The GMS, which growth management strategy, which you refer to, says it identifies we already have 130 hectares within our town boundary, which is ready to be. And some of it's been sitting there since 1988, and there's probably a good reason for that, why it's been sitting, because it's unsuitable. And so I don't know why that was still included in that growth management strategy when it was delivered. It should have been taken out. Everything you've also mentioned, it talks about Mahoney's Hill and some of the new areas. They're all on a hill, and they are all not $250,000 sections. So they're all 500,000 plus. So if when you're talking about College Road, O'Neill's Place, and Redruth, for goodness sake, as being included in our growth management strategy, no wonder we're a retirement home. So we need to change the settings here, guys, and that's what we need you to do. We're making it quite clear there needs to be we're missing the bottom rung in our build strategy for people to get onto the property ladder and build something and achieve that dream here in South Canterbury. So that's a worry for me, and unless we do something drastic to change, and this is an opportunity, and at the end of the day, we sit around this table and we vote and we move it forward, we can do that, regardless of all those reports. So it's only going to be the people that come saying, oh, you can't do that, such as Environment Canterbury and such as Waka Kotahi. We can change the settings here around this table. Here's an opportunity. I question the suggestion it's going to cost the ratepayer infrastructure. The developer is responsible for connecting to our services. So we already have the services. The services are out there. I asked you, Andrew, the other day, are they fully utilised or is there plenty spare capacity? There was plenty of capacity, were your words. So it helps mitigate the costs that in all our investments if we allow more properties to be developed at the developer's cost. We will be up for running the My Way bus another couple of kilometres out to that area. But actually, if you think forward to the future, 100 years, where do you think Timaru's going to go? It's not going to be climbing up around the mountains here. It's going to be going out towards in that triangle between Temuka.
Councillor Booth, did you have a question?
Yeah.
So I appreciate your comments, but I'm conscious that this meeting always
Okay,
takes a long time.
well, take that land out I just mentioned. We're short by about 600 houses.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Sorry to cut you off, but I'm conscious of time. Mayor, I promised Councillor Scott, and then we'll come back to Mayor Bowen.
I didn't really want to follow on from Alan, actually. I was actually just going back to, and I appreciate that you gave the sort of the overview of what the next steps would look like. And I think if we're trying to find a positive in this, Hamish, around the proposed district plan, was that if we did time it right, because the extension has nothing to do with what's on the table today, our current extension that we need to put in for our hearings, the capability to circulate that back into the hearing schedule as a positive, I see, if we're looking for one. So I think that that's a really good thing if we're talking about the proposed district plan process. So I think if we're trying to find a real positive around our proposed district plan, that this could be circulated back in at the right time, which I think is good. So for me, I think that's a real positive. Just following on from Alan, but in a gentler manner, I think, we do sit here at this table and we have a vision of the 75,000 by 2050, which is being highly promoted by Venture Timaru. And I think there is an opportunity to start to look at how we do this. And so when we're provided with an opportunity like this or a proposal, I really appreciate the investigations that we will need to do, and I know the pressures that we'll put on resourcing to do that. But I think we'd be negligent as well not to look at how we can make this work. So I do appreciate the pressures that it will put on, and I'm acknowledging that. But when you get presented with this, for an opportunity that we're with our vision, I think, it's a really interesting conversation to be having. So I do appreciate the work that you've brought to the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Mr. Cooper just wants to comment on that.
Yeah, just for clarity, Councillor Scott, we don't have any resource in-house for this because we are delivering the district plan. So it would be delivered by consultants, and it would be a management exercise of that. So I think, although it might present extra work, it's manageable. Yeah.
Mayor Bowen.
Thank you. In the interest of moving this on, and I think that Councillor Booth's speech is probably going to go down in history with Martin Luther King's add a few to the quote book. But look, I'd like to move that we do continue to investigate. So I'd like to move option 1.
Thank you, Mayor Bowen. Councillor Burt, just before I ask for a seconder, did you have one last comment to make?
Yeah, well, in fairness to our staff, when we ask them to do things, sometimes we come to this table and we have issues around debt and we have issues around borrowings and everything, and then we suddenly cut our cloth to decide that it's not a big deal. And we also ask for complete papers with warts and all, everything. So that's everything in. And then it's up to us to decide whether it's relevant or not. And so that's what they're doing. And we need to know and understand that before we turn around and say, I don't think that's relevant, don't include it in the future. So, let's think about what we say to our staff and understand that. I'm not sure what the angst is. This is this is an opportunity, and we either decide as a team or a group or as councillors that we need to further it. Let's just get on and make those decisions. One of the things I just saw in the risks, and I just want to ask, is it a big risk, and in what level it is the area that we're talking about is a flood assessment area. And in terms of affordability, we all know that in terms of that can have massive implications on how you build a house and what that looks like and the platforms that you do and foundations and everything. So in terms of affordability, it's a quick question, but I know it'll be also incorporated in our assessment overall that you would give to us. Can you just comment just on that?
Look, my understanding is that it would be presumably manageable on site. There would be sort of floor height requirements that would address that, but in terms of anything that might be needed over and above that, I couldn't really comment.
If I could just comment further on that, that's something part of the assessment that we'd have to do, and I think it's important to note that the assumption is that flat land is cheap to develop. That's not necessarily the case. Flat land, like with sewers, you need gravity for it to flow. Water flows downhill. Flat land doesn't have that, doesn't have that fall. So you're then probably going to need a pumping station in there. There's probably about $700 million perhaps for a pumping station. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, there are, and then of course, flat land also floods. And so you need to look at the flow height. So, you know, the assumption is that flat land is cheap to develop is not necessarily correct at times. So that's part of our investigation that we do.
Okay, so, sorry, councillor.
I've got no problem seconding that motion.
Thank you. So we have a mover and a seconder of option 1, but I'm just conscious that not all councillors have had a chance to ask questions. So if there's any other burning questions that or opposing views to option 1, I'll get you to make a comment, Mayor Bowen, and then I think Councillor Shannon may have had a question.
No, I'm conscious and just be aware that we're moving here an investigation. This will trigger conversations around Jordan, Temuka, and elsewhere. So just be ready for it.
Councillor Shannon.
Yeah, that's funny, Mayor Bowen, you read my mind.
Read mine too.
Yeah. I'm just really interested in seeing the information that comes back in terms of, and I'm very keen to see also all of the proposed economic benefits, including those coming from VT, because with respect, all I have seen so far, being new to the table, is a lot of aspiration and ambition, which I'm all across, but I've also come into a council that's really looking hard at how we're going to cut our cloth. So looking forward to those figures, and likewise VT, I'm still waiting for that data that Mayor Bowen asked for some time ago.
Thank you. And Councillor Paddington, one last comment, and then I see Mr.
No,
Burrell.
just it's a question. So what sort of time frame are we setting around this? That's what I want to know, because we say, yes, let's do it. I want to know from Paul what would be a reasonable time frame we could set.
Can we just discuss it, because I'm also keen to understand exactly what we're asking for and what work we're instructing council officers to do. I'll just come back to that. Mr. Burrell, did you have one last comment? Or?
Look, when it comes to the planning process and going forward, it does come back entirely to what evidence you've got. And so far we haven't been furnished with much. We may even be going counter to our own evidence. It does require that sort of process to get this through. I'd just like to reiterate one of my points, which is if option 1 is preferred, then it would be useful to seek some form of reassurance around deliverability and affordability of this site. So going back to that, is flat land the cheap option that we are assuming?
Mine, on Councillor Bennington's question, so the DAP that we're working on, that we're progressing right now for FDAs 1 and 2, the tentative timeframes we're looking at are hopefully May to have a development area plan for you guys to approve, for y'all to approve as a team. And then from there, that would be the process of doing the plan change, the variation, or whichever, plan change process, which that can take a year plus, depending on appeals and all those kind of things that could happen with it. So you're looking at 2 years, at least.
Thank you. So just before I put the motion that's been moved and seconded, I just want to be clear about what we're asking council officers to do, because obviously this is going to come at a lot of cost. And are we asking them to go away and prepare the Section 32A reports, or are we just asking them to come back with a plan of this is how much it'll cost to do all the work that's needed, and this is the plan and the time frame? Because in my mind it's the second option, but I just want to make sure that's what the intent of the resolution is. Mayor Bowen, did you just want to comment?
Yeah, and I think that's probably a combination, to be fair, because we do want to put the hammer down. So I'm conscious that the time to do the work, to understand, is possibly going to add to the 2-year time frame as well. So look, if I look at the issues in town around housing, it'd be great to be able to have a response within a 2-year period, because this is frustrating, so I think we need to, push go on this. Yeah. I don't know if that answered your question at all.
It's effectively push and go, on spending
On the cost.
unbudgeted money and the
Yeah,
cost.
look, I think
Yeah.
the cost, with the expertise we've got in council, they'll be able to wrap some indicative numbers around that pretty quickly, I would have thought, to a lower and a higher level as far as risk. Andrew, just a nod would be helpful.
Yeah, in doing a development area plan, for instance, we will need to outsource that to consultants. We of course have already proceeded on using FD1 and FD2 and the proposed district plans, so we can get some numbers around that, no problem. And then we can look at the modelling side of other flood side of things. We can get some numbers around that. Yes, we can certainly provide you some costs and some time frames, but yeah, as far as the infrastructure costs are concerned, that's the next stage.
It's got that in there, councillor Pye, around that working towards option 1 is currently unbudgeted expenditure, and if the preferred option, officers would look to be reporting back on the likely cost and rates impact. So it's actually in that option.
Well, thank you. I was just looking at the summary one at the very top of the report. Thank you for that. So we have the motion on the floor and seconded, so I will put that motion in. No, sorry,
just before you-
Councillor Piddington.
Sorry, just for clarity, we're talking about both those areas, aren't we?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
but
just investigate both of them.
both those
Correct.
areas. I just want to make sure.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but sorry, just for,
Okay, so I'll put, no, sorry, yes, councillor Booth.
Who are those reports for the benefit of? Are they actually for the benefit of us to make an informed decision?
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Booth, if you're talking about the reports that inform the Section 32 report, those reports are typically specialist reports. So there might be a transport report, all that stuff. There might be 8. If you look at AHOKA, I think they've got about 10 planning specialists that have had input. And each of those might be, I don't know, 20, 30K. It depends on what they are. So that's indicative. What are you asking me?
So who is the benefit of those reports for?
The benefit of those specialist reports, they're for the benefit of the panel that hears the hearings and listens to submissions.
And that panel then make a recommendation to the council, which we would then ratify. Is that correct?
Look, they're for the benefit of everybody, because all submitters have got to make an informed choice on this. Once the reports are there, I mean, it's for the benefit of anybody who engages in this process, because once you go out once you notify it, you legally are required to have the reports there, are publicly available, so people can make informed decisions on them, and they will inform submissions, and ultimately there'll be further reports that will go to the panel, whoever hears this, which may have to respond to submission points and then develop those Section 32 reports further.
And ultimately then they come back to us to be actually ratified, as in the recommendation from the Commissioner.
Yes, well, if it's to be adopted, that's ultimately right, yes.
Cool, okay, I'm gonna ask, we've got the motion and seconder, so all in favour, please say aye. Aye. And against? Motion carried. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone's patience and input into that. I think I've just got one more. No, I don't need to move us back out of public excluded because we're not in there, so I will close the meeting at 11:22, longest one again. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou, good morning. Welcome to Infrastructure Committee. I'd like to take a moment to thank Jan for attending. Welcome, Jan, from Jordan. So I'll give that one back to you. So I have received no apologies. Any identifications of urgent business, please? Okay, any identifications of minors of a minor nature? Yes, councillor Booth.
I'd just like to have a discussion about the City Hub.
Discussion about City Hub? Yep. Thank you.
We can discuss that as part of the project updates.
Okay. So we can discuss that part of the project updates, but if there's further discussion after we've done that, we can bring that into minor nature. Okay. Perfect. Any declarations of conflicts of interest? No. Chairman's report. Since our last committee meeting, I've attended some council workshops, an extraordinary council meeting. I was a guest speaker at Zonta, and I've attended the City Town Project Steering Group via Zoom. I've also met with Group Manager Andrew Dixon. So I'll take my report, I'll move my report, if I can have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Jackson. All those in favour? Aye. Passed. Moving on to 6.1 on page 6 is confirmation of the minutes held in July 25. Any matters arising? Happy to move. Thank you, Councillor Shannon and Councillor Oliver. All those in favour? Aye. Carried. Thank you. Lovely. Moving on to our first of our 3 reports today. So 7.1, we are looking at the information request from Council's Infrastructure Committee. So the first one regarding the section of Local Government Act and roading name policy. So that can now be closed out because it was loaded up on the hub and all councils will have access to that. The Waka Kātahu further information, well, that was received through email on the 1st of September to all councillors.
Just a
yes.
question. James Cargill's reply around the Showgrounds entranceway, State Highway 1, Bridge Street, was a whole lot of waffle. He didn't actually advance it any further than we were at. Mm-hmm. And same with the sealing of the portion of the State Highway. Again, no real answer to that. So can we follow up and put some pressure on Whakatahi to actually deliver what they promised us?
Thank you, Councillor Printing. Welcome, Susie. Susie, do you want to speak to that?
Unfortunately, I haven't actually seen James's reply, but yes, I can certainly follow up. We've got a session prioritising the RLTP development tomorrow in Christchurch, of which they will be there, so I'll verbally do that and then also follow up via email. So yes, that's fine. And Andrew also may want to respond to that.
Yeah. I'll certainly take that action and go back to James Cargill to get a firm reply. That's all I can really do. Whether you get one or not is another question.
Yeah, my question is similar in, does it meet our expectations on what they said they were going to rehab, which was from Hobbs Street through to Luxmore Road, which I understand some of the issues with extending seal further, but the issues are right through that corridor. And a year ago, or whenever it was, he committed that he was, the road was get a full rehab, but now it's only part of the road that's going to get a full rehab. And there again, it goes to the underspend and back to our district. So I just think we need to challenge that.
All we can really do is challenge that, push the point. They will always come back and say that we're working to national priorities and that their funding is limited. But we maybe even bringing it up through the Regional Transport Committee is another avenue.
Can we alert them on what they're actually spending in our district? Because I think people need to know, especially coming into election year. Sorry, this is slightly off the topic, but this frustrates the hell out of me. That people need to know that the dollars aren't coming back here. Mm-hmm. And, our roads are crap and they're funding infrastructure in Auckland and elsewhere. So I'd like them to be transparent and know exactly what they're funding back into our district.
We can certainly take that as an action and we can do that.
Sorry, just correct.
That's right. We'll put that on the action point for our next stand. For our next standing committees, we will replace the top one. And any more questions regarding that standing that action? Yes.
He did give us Did he give us a date for the Evans Street resealing, like the serious job, or have they postponed that as well?
Wasn't it the summer?
Yeah.
I thought it was the summer.
In his response, from what I read, it committed to part of it. So Luxmore through to Hobbs, which is where some of that replacement pipe's going, but it doesn't go from Luxmore through to up the hill through the showgrounds, because obviously there's some other things that need to go through there, but they've partially committed, would be my thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
It was my understanding that due to the culvert not being done at the showgrounds, they weren't going to proceed with the rest of that. So that potentially is a major issue because we're actually waiting for the developer to do that job. And I understand that perhaps under the current circumstances may not be happening. So there's a potential major issue there that is going to disrupt our main transport corridor unless we've got some powers to make things happen around the developer of the showgrounds.
I have seen some correspondence from Wakatahi involving the showgrounds developer, and they're basically reviewing that agreement and sort of realising that it's probably not going to happen as quick as they would like it to, and they're taking the lead of actually doing that project themselves.
Okay, moving on to the update on Peel Forest landfill. So we are waiting for consent. So hopefully in 6 weeks' time we might have something. Okay, so 7.1 is that it's receive and note this report. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Scott, and seconded by Councillor Burt. All those in favour? Right, carried. Okay, moving on to report 7.2. So Susie, the seal extension project approval. Take the report as read, and you've made one recommendation there that I'll let you speak to.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I'll take the report as read, but just noting that we have not had any applications for 50% funded seal extensions from any residents in the Timaru district. As such, there's an available budget to allocate if the committee wishes to, and the budget that is approved in the annual plan is $330,000. So officers recommend investing in the Rangitata Gorge seal extension due to the high ongoing maintenance costs, sole access for a number of properties, resilience reasons, and an existing long length of unsealed road, which is 31 kilometres, and it has a large heavy vehicle component of the traffic volume. And just also noting that there are some 90 kilometres across the district that would benefit for either accessibility, safety, dust nuisance or traffic volume that would benefit from being sealed for users and adjacent properties. And basically if we funded around, as in the report, around $1 million per annum, it would take approximately 10 years to complete these sections. Unfortunately, long seal extensions do not meet the Waka Kotahi funding criteria or the draft government policy statement that is just out for consultation at the moment. So the work would need to be fully funded by council if there is no adjacent landowner contribution.
Thank you. Any questions? I'll go to Councillor Oliver first.
Yeah, look, I'd just like to support the recommendation, obviously, with the introduction of a bit of forestry up in the gorge. There's been several, those truck movements and heavy vehicle movements are only going to increase. Currently the seal stops at the top of the hill, which isn't ideal, and obviously coming up from Cole Hill, it's a little bit windy, and I think those residents up there will definitely benefit from this and will be very grateful for this to be done.
Thank you. Mayor Bowen.
Yeah, thanks. Look, I don't support any option. I guess one of the issues that I have is actually we need to throw a cost-benefit lens across this. If you look to the cost of grading on some of those roads, which, it's indicated that there's a cost here, but it would be great to know exactly what that looks like. And I know I've talked to Councillor Pye in regard to this, some sort of matrix framework in and around cost benefit on where all these lay, and so we can actually make a decision on, hey, if there's a high cost associated with Rangitata Gorge as such, we actually know what the numbers are, and then methodically go through around the decisions, and we can put weightings to some of those other factors. And I recognise that Nadine's here in regard to the road and the dust issues, and I think it was one of the points that actually she raised at that and put some weighting in behind that. So I think there's some a framework that needs to be built in around this for us to be able to consider. And also, just like to highlight that we are, effectively looking really hard, and to the point, I think Scotty made around cutting our own cloth, and I think we've just got to be really lined up before we make these decisions. And so I'd rather see that as a savings until we've got some better data around this at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to welcome Jan up from the Geraldine Community Board. If she can come sit next to you, Mayor Bowen, please. She'd like to speak.
Thanks, everybody. I'd like to get behind support for this idea. It's a section of road that's got lots of judder bars and some steep drops and lots of corners and so on. So, obviously there are some hazards involved there, but also that it's a secondary feeder road that we're looking at, and there's quite a tourism component there. And while I'd never be advocating for mass tourism up the gorge, I see it as a pretty fickle seasonal industry, which can have some negative impacts on more dependable year-round industries. We do need to take account of that tourism component and that it is growing. Yeah, so that's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Pye, then I'll come to my left.
I'd probably just like to endorse what Mayor Bowen's already said. I'm not supportive of any option at this stage because I don't feel like we have all the information, and we're only in the report considering two roads where I think we should be looking at all of the unsealed roads across, and on one road we've got several residents, on the other road it doesn't really talk about how many residents there are, and I just don't feel like we have all the information. And then to Jan's point, she's just talked about the tourism factor, so yeah, I'm supportive of actually not doing anything at this point until we can have all the information and make an assessment across all of the roads.
Okay. Councillor Booth.
Look, I guess my concern is that each time we put some seal down like this and then the trucks start driving all over it, we're back there. It might cost 300,000, but then we're back there a year later and actually we're spending $1 million. So that's that would be one concern for me. I think if a whole lot of trucks going to be using it, due to some logging, you're best to leave it in the interim in shingle, and so you're just grading that. I'm sure that's going to be a lot cheaper than building the road up and putting a proper substructure in.
I just want to let Stixon reply to that, whether your facts and figures of $1 million in a year's time is correct.
No, we would certainly build the truck factor into the design, so it would be built to withstand the traffic volumes that are anticipated on that. So yeah, we wouldn't be going back to it in a year later or 2 years later or 3 years or whatever. So we certainly account for that, and we can build roads to that standard. Unlike highways who tend to cut corners, we do it properly.
Susie.
Yeah, just to add to that, yes, we would be accounting for the heavy traffic volume on any of the unsealed roads that we'll be looking to seal, as we have with all of the pavement rehabilitations we've done. So like, out on Te Moana Road, Earl Road, for example, all of those ones that we've done some big pavement rehabilitations on the sealed road. And just noting that the recommendation 1 is only for a short section. It doesn't get us right to the bottom of Coal Hill, unfortunately, because it's just maximising the available budget. So it would only be a couple of kilometres at that level of investment. It costs a lot more to do the full section.
Just point out, we do have a seal extension policy, and that policy does take into account traffic volume, houses affected by dust, the hierarchy of the road, and the recommendations here have been based on that policy. So we can provide further information if needed in that, in the assessment of it. There is a lot of roads that could potentially be put in through that policy. We haven't done them all. We've only done what we consider the higher priority ones.
Councillor Shannon.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to ask. On board with what Councillor Pye and Mayor Bowen are saying there in terms of more information to make better informed decisions at the council table, but I would have assumed you'd already been through some sort of prioritisation yourself and assessed against whatever data that you needed, and also this particular one must have been highlighted way before this week's meeting and is budgeted for. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. There's been a fair bit of work done in the background to bring in against policy and looking at percentage heavies and bringing in some other componentry around that dust nuisance, that safety, for example. All of the unsealed roads that have made the list, which are basically in a similar situation to this with number of houses, etc., are economic analysis against those is low, so there is low benefit to doing the work. So when you look at the economics alone, but when you bring in the other factors, safety, resilience, dust nuisance, etc., that's when they start to, the intangible benefits. But yes, there's a bit of work that goes into it. Perhaps there could be something out of this, just suggesting through you, Madam Chair, that we could look at maybe the seal extension policy itself and look at reviewing that and building a multi-criteria analysis process for that.
Sure. Thank you, Susie. Mayor Bowen.
Yeah, look, I think this should be considered, against other roads, and maybe this has been prioritised, but I also want us to consider it against the overall budget. And if we don't, and it's the opportunity cost of $1, and if we don't spend $1 today, we can look to, is this across council's priorities the best place to spend this $330,000? And at the moment, I think actually we should just take a pause on some of these costs and just reflect and look and deep dive into our budgets, understand where the money should go. So that's why I'm still supportive of doing nothing at this stage.
Okay. Councillor Pye.
I just wondered if, you talked about the assessment work that's gone in behind here, if we can make that publicly available so it's more transparent, so that residents understand how roads are prioritised and then needing to come and make submissions on annual plans and things like that, because I thought, if the whole community understands that, we might get better buy-in.
Thank you.
I think a point I will make too is that an unsealed road is always going to be cheaper to maintain than a sealed road. And it's sealing of roads is more of a level of service discussion rather than an economics.
Okay, any more questions from the floor? No? We're all good. So,
I'll just make a quick comment.
Oh, absolutely. Councillor Oliver.
Obviously, on reflection of the prioritisation of this piece of road through the policy, I'm happy to move the recommendation to do that seal extension on Ringtata Gorge Road.
Sorry, I can't hear that last bit.
I'm happy to
move recommendation
recommendation for the sealing of Ringtata Gorge Road.
Thank you. Okay, do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Shannon. All those in favour, say aye or raise your hand. 1, 2, what's that? 4 against. 2, where's that? 6. Okay, motion not carried. I feel like I need a hammer. Okay, so maybe we can talk about further at some stage about where to from here.
Yes, would
look
you
at
like
the
to see
policy.
a further report on the seal extension policy and opportunity to review that?
Yep, that sounds like a great idea. So a breakdown of how many vehicles are on these unsealed roads and the type of vehicles, because the trucks, cars, yeah. What about residential and schools be included? Would you like that? Residential dwellings and schools? No, sorry. I got it on the hand. Sorry. Okay, we're going to move on to 7.3. Okay, so 7.3, we are looking at the infrastructure key project updates for the first quarter. So just a note from my discussions with Mr. Dixon that Peel Forest, we hope to include that in the next meeting because consent should be through and we'll have some progress updates with it. So we'll just work through this report with each project. The first one is the Road Renewal and Improvement Program. Susie, do you have anything to add?
No, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Okay. Nice pictures. Moving on to page 28, the Red Roof landfill cell 3.5 and gas flare. Oh, yes, Mayor Bowen?
I'm interested to know the cost and sort of benefit. That you don't have to, it doesn't have to be definitive down to a dollar, but around the nitrifying trickling filter, because that is a good solid piece of infrastructure that we'll put in there. And what is what are we trying to achieve with that?
It's basically part of a treatment that's required before we discharge into the lagoon.
Just to help meet consent.
It's a consenting issue. We are. There is quite high nitrates around the runoff around the landfills, so we just, as part of this is to reduce those nitrates. You're right, it's a compliance issue.
Okay, moving on to the downlands, Tianawai Reserve covers. So the tenders evaluation and due diligence is in progress. It's from the 5th of September, so they're just looking further into options.
Yes, we are still evaluating the tenders on this particular project. We have two very different systems that have been proposed, and we are, I guess, going through a due diligence and assessing those of what is best for the long-term life cycle, the whole of life cost in regard to this. So that work is still continuing, and we are seeking further information from the suppliers, and then we'll be reporting back. It will go to Tenders and Procurement Committee.
Opahi pipeline renewal, 85% completed. Yes, Councillor Shannon.
Just a quick question. Recent progress as trenching has reached across the river now. Work around Waitui Stop Bank is commencing. Through discovery, there is more to be done here than initially anticipated. Meaning what?
Where was it?
More work to be done here than initially anticipated on the Stop Bank. What have you discovered?
Waitohi Stop Bank.
Yeah. Look, unfortunately I can't answer that, but all I can say is that that has been overcome, and we are on schedule to have this finished by the end of the month. So,
Good. Right. Thank you.
Parera pipeline renewal, which is coming close, May 2024. Okay, Timaru City Town program. So I'm going to go to Councillor Booth. What's your questions, please?
Look, I'm just a little bit concerned at the continuity of the rollout or the people involved on the council's behalf. I understand that Selena has been doing a good job, is actually on the move, and that it doesn't appear that we've got anyone that's actually taking ownership of this project, which is actually quite a considerable one. That since I've been involved and OJ's been the chair, we've had quite a few changes, and it seems to be sort of shifted from post to pillar. There's a little bit of a concern, and especially such an important project that we're embarking on. It's not the sort of thing that we should be doing ad hoc. We should be actually ensuring we've got the right people involved. I'm not sure about the fact that we have the people that have been leading it have now actually got a consultant from Wellington who is actually a project manager. They are then contracting on, or we've sort of passed the baton to them. The baton's been passed, I presume, to a urban designer somewhere. So it's like a big thing that goes round, and every time it's quite disjointed. It feels like that to me anyway, and I'm quite concerned about we're spending money and actually it's not being well spent, and I guess a lack of planning potentially. I shouldn't say that, but I would have thought that if we're doing anything, we should have a an urban designer right beside us, and guiding us and making sure that we're actually doing the right things as we're doing them, even at this early stage.
Mr. Dixon?
Yeah. Thank you, councillor. This project has undertaken a transformation really and what it was originally. So we have a very robust project plan in place now for this, and we have, I assure you, controlled costs a lot more than what was previously. There is a number of different tranches that are running concurrently here. So we're doing you've got the private partnerships, which Venture Timaru are doing. We've got our quick win projects or minor projects, which is underway, and they are being delivered. And the big piece is the master plan. Now, Isthmus Consultants are preparing that master plan. There will be a draft that's getting launched in next week, I think, or a couple of weeks' time, somewhere in there, and which will be discussed with the steering group. And then before it goes to any public consultation, or before it comes back to council in the first instance, then on to public consultation. So that is the big piece of work that will set the scene. After we get the master plan adopted, we'll be looking at urban design and how to actually get the stuff on the ground. But there is a lot of work going in the background. Selena is still there, by the way. She is working 2 days a week on City Town. So.
And I think from the previous meeting, I did make the suggestion that all councils should be invited to the master plan meeting that we are having as steering group, which I think is in a fortnight. So I'm not sure whether fellow councils have been invited to that meeting, but that was suggested at the time. Anything further, Councillor Booth? Okay. Any other questions on the floor? Lovely, move on. And then we move to CPlay project. Had a lot of water down there, but no damage was formed.
No damage was done. Went for a swim, part of it, and yeah, and it was pleasing to note there was no damage. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, Stu. That was one of my questions. I was hoping the burst pipe hadn't set back the project, so that's really good to hear. I just wondered with the reports that the update report we received, it's progress dated 30th of June, which I think must be incorrect because when I looked back at the last report, that was also dated 30th of June. And the spend between last month's last standing committees and this one is only around $100,000. So I just wanted to are we still on track for the council spend, or is that starting to escalate? Because we don't seem to have spent any money between the last report and this one. So are we slowing down, or how are we going?
Yeah, the costs.
With my council hat on, not my CPlay committee.
The costs have been very tightly controlled on this project,
Yeah, okay.
And yes, we are on track with the council spend. There is no request come through for any additional funding from council, but the committee themselves are still, I guess, applying for external funding. They have the basics are fully funded, but there are some extra stuff that they would like to see, so they are seeking funding for that. And if that funding is successful, it will be incorporated in the construction.
Yes, Councillor Paddington.
I just wondered in the projects whether last couple of years ago we spent an inordinate amount of time on chrome platers on North Street. At the time it was one of the New Zealand's worst contaminated sites. We were going to move forward on that. I know the stuff's been taken away, and I know we've budgeted in our annual plan a cost for that, but can that pop back up so we actually are aware what's happening with that? And the second one in that category is the Pariora Dam.
If I just can respond to the Pariora Dam one, that has been discussed in the Audit and Risk Committee, and a motion was passed that we would do no further work in that space with the Pariora Dam. It is extremely challenging with landowners and everything else, so it is agreed that we will leave it as it is. And
well, perhaps, Andrew, if we could get some of the background on that, you might decide something in audit and risk, but it leaves 9 councillors unknowing
Point
whatever
taken.
the number is that aren't on that committee.
I'll ensure that the Audit and Risk Committee report is put to the Infrastructure Committee at the next meeting.
And Chrome Plate as well, do you recall where we are with that?
I'm not involved here.
Oh, hello.
Trudy. Yeah.
Welcome, Trudy. You've learnt about Chrome Platers already?
Kia ora, through you, Madam Chair. Those reports do go through the Audit and Risk Committee. We can arrange for those reports to be recirculated, and because they're issues on a watch list, Councillor Piddington.
Again, that's not very helpful for the rest of the councillors that aren't on audit and risk and get asked questions.
You are, it doesn't matter if you're not on the committee, you're welcome to attend any of the meetings.
And a lot of that's public excluded, and there will be people in the community that are interested in it.
Yes, there is public excluded for various reasons, parts of that. Yep.
Anything more, Councillor Piddington? You're right. Yes, Councillor Birch, then Councillor Booth.
No, so from the audit and risk, I mean, it's the stuff around the chrome platers. We are basically sitting in a position whereby if you go to the Contaminated Rehabilitation Fund, there are 10 projects on that, of which are the big 10 for the whole of New Zealand, and on there sits the chrome platers. As a council, you know, we are in a position where we've said that we were just a conduit for that to happen. We don't need to make a decision on it. We shouldn't make a decision on anything because we shouldn't have any liability at all. It's with other government departments. We just need to sit back and wait for when they make a decision. Nothing will happen until there's an effect beyond the boundary of that, and at this stage there isn't. The only time it will become an issue is if there's a fire or a significant earthquake, and then the other things will come into effect. But we need to hold our position on that. Don't need to discuss it, don't need to keep bringing it up, and we need to just let that just sit until those other government departments do what they're supposed to do, and in the spirit of what the decisions we made back some time ago. Just as an update.
Thank you, Councillor Booth. Just before we go to you, Councillor Booth, I'm going to welcome Nicole up to the table, please.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. An update on the chrome platers. We have been approached by the Ministry for Environment, and I've been working with a fellow officer at Environment Canterbury. They're encouraging us to put an application in for stage 4, and they have some money. They want to see this project completed and remediated. So I'm in the process literally this week and next week of pulling together a draft. They've been in contact with me to work through that draft. I am looking at how we will end up with 0 costs on this. So finding a different way of actually having the building brought down onto ground, and at that point then the remediation kicks in. So there is also private interest, which I haven't had a chance to update. It's just come through this last week with Trudy, of somebody that's interested in the site as well. So there's a fair bit moving on the chrome platers at this stage.
Thank you, Nicole. And Councillor Booth.
I'm just interested to know if we've actually rated our ratepayers for any costs for the chrome platers.
Do you know that? We are approaching Ministry of Environment, and I've stood by that 0 to our ratepayers, and how do we get this fully remediated through stage 4, and it goes up to ministers for that conversation once we've actually put the application in for stage 4, which is the final stage. They have paid for all costs to date, and that we received a letter from them asking us to engage with them, and that there was funding available. So we're just going to go through all those processes now.
Thank you, Nicole, for the update. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yeah, Mayor Bowen.
No, just comment. Our cost would only be our staff cost in that regard.
For some reason I thought I'd seen something in a budget where there was a monetary value put on it, a bit like Peel Forest, and it was included in a
I think it's always been clear that council, you know, is not expected to wear any cost on this particular building. But it is a responsibility of the Ministry and Environment Canterbury.
Anything more, Mayor Bowen? No. Okay, so the recommendation is that we receive and note the progress reports. I'm happy to move that if I get a seconder. Thank you, Mayor Bowen. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you for your attendance. Infrastructure closes at 12:06.
Welcome to Community Services Committee meeting, opening at 12:10. Special welcome to Jan from Geraldine Community Board. Welcome, Jan. I have received no apologies. No, excellent. Identification of items of urgent business. Nope. Do we have any identification of matters of minor nature? Declarations of conflicts of interest. Right, we'll move on to my chair's report. Since our last meeting, I have attended the combined community board information and training evening, and I really enjoyed getting to know all the community boards and listening to their issues. So thank you very much for the invitation to join that. I also joined the City Town Project Steering Group meeting in July via Zoom, so it was really good to connect with that project. I attended the community response meeting with Mayor Nigel and just us two. That was good. I've also attended the Theatre and Heritage Facility Governance Reference Group meeting. We also attended the local user group and stakeholder engagement session, so it was good to present the work of the team on that. I got invited to the working group for the Timaru to St Andrews road thingy. So yeah, that was interesting. I enjoyed that. It was good. There was a really good mix from the community, from farming to road transport. Yeah, there was a good round of a lot of different people there, and so my understanding is that people will come back. That Waka Kotahi team will be back next week. I've personally not seen what date. I don't know if anyone else has, but they're coming back out to the community with a revised plan. So I encourage you all to attend and listen to the great people of Periora, St Andrews. Give their next round of feedback on that proposal. I also went on a road trip last week with Councillor Piddington and Mayor Nigel to Ngai Punawai Sports Centre to look at the new 10-court indoor facility there, which was awesome. So it was really good to look at a facility that is currently being built and the cost to that. So it was a really positive trip. Oh, and obviously Andrew, too, Mr. Dixon. So that was great. So I'd like to move my report. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Mayor Nigel. Confirmation of minutes. Held on the 25th of July. If there's no questions to that, could I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Pai, seconded Mayor Nigel. Okay, and we'll move to the reports. So our action register, I'm really loving these action registers, by the way. So there was a request to have our regular monthly progress report to councillors regarding Egantai Art Gallery, and obviously that is on this report, so thank you very much, officers, for initiating that. So that action is done. I think I moved those, don't I? Yes, could I have a mover for that? Thank you, Councillor Parker. Seconder, Councillor Shannon. Community development update. Here, thank you. Report 7.2.
Kia ora koutou, Madam Chair and councillors. I'm assuming the report that is before you will have been read, so basically I'm here to answer any questions you have, and I think Jess is sitting here if you have any further questions regarding her areas of interest, which is welcoming communities and safer communities. Any questions?
Just on your youth advisory, you had the meeting just very recently. Did you have a good turnout in response to that, and what are the next plans from that?
Thank you for asking. We had a reasonably good turnout. We had 17 youth turn up on Wednesday last week. So we had a good representation from the Tongan Youth Centre, which is just a couple of doors down from the Y. It was a good start. I would say, to be honest, it wasn't a good representative group, but that's to come further when more sort of advertising and that is going. But so far, so good, and I hope to provide some more information at the next meeting.
I was just going to ask about the homeless update. So have you got some numbers around that, or how do you basically look at that, and what information you get, and I guess ratify what you're talking about?
Thanks for asking. So I'm not quite sure how much information you have. With the homelessness update, it was an initiative along with the Mayor to try and address the issue that our officers were finding with people sleeping in rivers and in their cars and so forth, and Council not having the appropriate bylaws to deal with it. But on the other side of it was more of a welfare issue. We had a lot of people going into winter without housing. So the first meeting was really good. We had a large number of agencies attending, and there was a follow-up meeting after that, and it was agreed that Council's role in this is we can't provide the services. Our job was to get the agencies in the room that can provide the services and try and find a way forward. What we've agreed to do, if the Safer Communities approve under their work streams, is to produce a brochure basically similar to the one that Tauranga City Council have, asking, do you need help? And just referring people to the various agencies, giving them all the information they need to find shelter when they need it, or the right agencies to engage with. So there'll be that, and the other thing that was discussed was just a regular meeting of those agencies which can provide services and helping to facilitate that under the Safer Communities umbrella. But that hasn't yet gone to the Safer Communities for decision making, but that's what's proposed.
So have you got any numbers? Has someone gone round and said, oh, there was 5 people sleeping rough last night or something?
That's a good question. I don't have the information here, but I'm quite happy to give you the information I do have, Councillor Booth, after the meeting. Yep.
No further questions? Okay, so we will receive a note, the Community Services Development Update Report. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you, Councillor Jackson, second, and Councillor Burt. Thank you very much, Claire. Okay, now we move to our progress update reports, and I think, Nicole, you're going to come up. Okay, so first one on the table is the Agintyre House Gallery Seismic Repairs Project. There's a report there, so if anyone has any questions to that, now is the time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So updating progress from previous month. The RFP is out in the market at the moment. We had 6 firms with interest in doing the works. One has withdrawn. They were from the Christchurch area. The rest are actually all here local in Timaru. And we fielded a couple of questions from the group, and we're making good progress on that. The RFP closes on the 3rd of October, just before that, and we will be making a final review on the 2nd of October and look to work with the winner of that evaluation process. I will then formulate the paper which will come up to tenders and procurement for council to make a decision. But good progress, things are underway, and we're prepping the site at this time, and we're working, and it's within budget. The indications are definitely well within budget.
Within budget, that's what we like to hear. I'll just give a comment. I'd just like to commend the team that are working on this. Just all of a sudden, it feels like it's made a change. It's heading in the right direction, and I'm now a lot more confident that we can actually achieve this and get this back open for the community. So, really positive for those that have been involved. So thanks for the work.
Thank you very much.
Is there any further questions? Okay, thank you. Well, Nicole, don't move, because now we'll move on to the Theatre Royal and Heritage Facility Development Progress Report Update. Oh, sorry, Shivers. Sorry, got ahead of myself, forgot my moving. It's moved by Mayor Nigel and seconded by Councillor Burt. Sorry, Jess. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, a briefing update. We've moving along really quickly now with information that's coming from the team. I will be expecting personally to the project team the 100% of the developed design drawings, and for those that were able to attend the reference group stakeholder and also the opening of the exhibition, and it's open for the next 4 weeks, so please, if you have time, pop up there. You'll actually get some of the decals and pictures of some of the proposals of what it will look like inside. The team are working really hard behind the scenes. 100% will come to me and the team end of September. We then have 5 weeks where South Base will go away then and do the full estimation cost on that 100% developed. We also do our review from our QS on our side as well. We'll be ready and waiting for when they come. And if there is any value engineering, we will bring it through to the reference group. We're not anticipating, they're telling us that they're working within the estimates, apart from some of the changes that were agreed, and those costs will go on the number when we get here. And we'll bring it back to full council with a paper to discuss the estimate cost. but also some early works package, which will be a fixed lump sum that we'll also have QS'd, and that will arrive in November. So we're aiming for November for that information to be here in front of you, to keep to our timetable. Are there any questions?
I just would like to add to that, Nicole, too, what we chatted about for the meeting is obviously just to reconfirm to councillors that in November, the developed design price estimate and lump sum price for the demolition and early works will come to council. So that will sort of be the first evidence that we will have on where we're going. Also, what has been requested too is that business sort of operational plan at that time, which is Mr. Ingram and Mr. Howe are working on. So those two things will come at the same time, which we've always talked about as important. And then once the detailed design commences through that November-February phase, the full cost and construction contract will come back to us at this or at council in February at some point, and then that's the green light.
Just wondered, actually, because there's still talk in the community, could at that meeting, because we're getting the operating cost, could we have the true cost of the theatre over the time we're putting it there? Seems we put in rates, you know, the $14 a year didn't float with anyone I talked to, wouldn't even pay the interest. So I actually just want to know the true cost of the theatre. If we're putting it over 80 years, what it will cost us at the end of that time. Whoever's responsible for the numbers.
Thanks, Councillor Pillington. We'll note that and can work through that for you. Yes.
Just following on from Councillor Pillington, the initial idea was that it was going to be paid back over 80 years, which is unheard of. And so most projects, you try put a mortgage into the bank, it's 25 years. So I'd like to see the numbers based around 25, 30 years and with current paying back. Seabay was paid back over 10 years. I don't see any, so I don't know how we're going to pay that money back. So I'd like to know reality. It should be a civic facility like that should be paid back within 25 to 30 years, not 80. That's 3 generations, unheard of. So let's be real.
So I think it's the depreciation modelled over 80 years, not the loan specifically. But my question was around the operation model, and I'm just conscious that this is such a wonderful opportunity, and I know, Nigel, you're working with Philip on this, and I just want us to include a real hard look at the conferencing opportunity. We've got that flexible space, and I just want it to be left quite flexible so we can get and optimise our revenue streams. I think that's really important, and I'm sure things are being considered, but I just wanted to leave that with you.
Yes, thank you. We've progressed an initial draft of the operational plan internally and finalised that on Thursday for wider circulation within officer testing, and it does take into account full use and conferencing and sources of revenue stream as well. And we'll hopefully have that ready, well, certainly for that November meeting.
Great. Is there any further questions? Okay, well, I won't forget this time. We'll receive and note the updated briefing report. So thank you, Nicole. Move that, me and Nigel, sorry, and seconded by Councillor Pye. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Right, now I'm not quite sure well, this is reports written by Beth. No, its author is... Do we have anyone? Oh, yes, we do. The team's come out. Right, good work, team.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'm just standing in for Beth. just while she's on leave. This report has been authored by Sarang and Michelle from Seabay, and it's basically seeking approval from council to apply for funding from Trust Aoraki. So I'll hand over to the team to give the overview of the report and be available for any questions. Thanks.
Yes, so we are seeking a resolution letter today, and that is in regards for funding to continue facilitating the Water Skills for Life program that we provide at Seabay, and that's for year grades 0 to 8. So that's to give them the fundamental basics for all water situations, especially the recreational water situations that they'll find themselves in.
Thanks, Sarang and Michelle. Look, I really appreciate you bringing this report, and really important that we get this funding to help subsidise this, and it's such a great thing for the community, so I'm happy to move it.
Just in the past, what's been the process? Has this always been what's happened, or
yes,
where's the money normally
we've
from?
always came to you guys first seeking a resolution letter, and because that's one of their requirements for submitting an application, and we still have to get ready all the documents and get all the numbers ready for the Trust Aoraki, which we are currently working with them already. So we're just waiting for the main resolution letter to come from you guys, and then we'll continue the process.
That's right, I'm working. So is this the same program, effectively, that's operated out at our community pools as well? What's that? Yeah, that's where the primary and the likes go to?
Yeah, so our teachers actually travel out to some of the district pools closer to them where it's able to, and it is delivered at our district pools as well.
I thought so. It's sensational. All of my kids have been through it. Well done. Yeah. Guys, yeah.
And if I can just add to that as well, I know that at my younger children's school there are kids that don't have the opportunity to go, you know, in the water into the pool. So this program is absolutely essential for them. So well done. Okay, so we had a mover and we had a seconder. You've got another question?
Do all our schools participate?
Already had a mover and a seconder. So all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Well done, team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, consideration for urgent business items, none. Consideration for minor nature matters, none. So I will close the meeting at 12:30. Well done. Thank you.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome to a strategy meeting, Commission strategy meeting, and I'll move straight away with apologies. Any outstanding apologies? Have none. Welcome Jan from our community group, thank you, much appreciated. Identifications of urgent business, I don't have any, I have none of a minor nature. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Very good. Chairman's report, very quick. Council meetings, citizenship ceremony, appointments, shortlisting panel for the CE, business awards on behalf of the council, tenders and procurement committee, workshops, and meeting with the group manager of CNS. I'll move that. Seconder for that, please. Councillor Parker. All those in favour? Against, so moved. Good. Minutes of the previous meetings. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Mayor Bowen and Councillor Booth. Any questions in relation to that? Otherwise, all those for? Against? So moved. Moving on to report 7.1 on page 11. And we have our actions register update. I'll take that as read, and you have the updates before you. Are there any questions in relation to any of those action points or elaboration on the updates? Okay, well, I'll move that. Seconder, please. Councillor Pye. All those in favour? Against, so moved. Thank you. Moving on to 7.2 on page 14. We have our continuous improvement updates, and welcome to present to us. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor, councillors and Mr Chairperson. I'll provide a brief summary on my report. Yeah. So Bookable Stage 1 has gone live and is now accessible to all our users. Stage 2, which is the events module, is in the planning phase, and that's due to commence in October next month. The public place trading is currently being reviewed to simplify the processes. Discussions are being had with different groups to gather insights and feedback. We are also in the process of creating a survey to send that out to our vendors so we can get some feedback from them, and we'll provide an update at the next commercial and strategy committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, councillors? Mayor Bowen.
Look, happy to move, but really appreciate the report. This is all really positive stuff, so I do appreciate the work, and I know there's a lot of work that goes in behind this, so thank you. Thank you.
Seconder, please. Councillor Jackson. All those in favour? Against, so carried. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, moving on to our report 7.3, long-term plan reference group update on page 16, and welcome, Venture. Thank you very much.
Moi Reina, thank you very much. I'm going to take this report as read. I'm here to answer any questions that you may have. I trust you all have the updated workshop schedule. There were a few chops and changes to accommodate clashes with other commitments, but I think we've nailed it now. So hopefully it's in everybody's diary. And if there's any queries about that, I'm happy to answer. If there are going to be instances where some councillors will be away, but we will still make sure that you have all of the information, and everything will be available on the hub. And of course, I have my little informative videos that I'm sending you from time to time. And I have another one to send to you today, which I'm just seeking guidance from the reference group if they're okay with it. And I will send that out with some information I also have for you for next Tuesday's workshop on the financial and infrastructure strategies, with a bit of preparation. So some light reading for you, but these are reference guides for you to use regularly throughout this whole LTP process. Explains everything financial that you need to know.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thanks for those initiatives. It's one of the biggest things that we attend to as councils. Yes. So we've certainly got some work ahead of us. Any questions in relation to this paper? Awesome. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Parker and Councillor Booth. All those in favour? Against, so carried. Thank you very much.
Kia ora, councillors. I'll just have these in the back and you can pick them up as you go. Thank you.
Okay, moving along to our report 7.4, Accounting Policies 2023 Annual Report, page 19. Thank you, John. Welcome.
Good afternoon. After that big pile of LTP papers, my little accounting policy paper looks quite small. So you'll be delighted to know that we have no need to go through point by point and look at every accounting policy. Mr. Chairman, I've presented the report, and the key elements I think are outlined in the discussion points. One point that we need to understand, I think, corporately, is that these are group accounting policies, the group being Timaru District Council, Orangi Stadium Trust, Venture Timaru and Timaru District Holdings Limited. However, my understanding is that this review today is on behalf of Timaru District Council, and there's no group review of the group accounting policies until they're approved as part of the annual report by the whole council. And this is an issue that TDHL and I are discussing in terms of reviewing how we improve this process in 2024, because the only point at which these are discussed for, particularly for TDHL, is at their statement of intent. And there probably needs to be some rationalisation and review point to ensure that we have consistent accounting policies across the group. And substantially they are, but at the moment there's no formal mechanism for ensuring that that happens. So I'm just noting that, and you need to make no decisions about that today, but at some point I hope that we will be addressing that. You'll see that the most significant change is the valuation of artworks. We have been progressively moving towards a fair value for all of the assets over time. It's not an instantaneous process, as you will have noticed. The long discussions about water valuations and roading valuations, that's now settled down, and we have a process which we're largely in agreement with Audit New Zealand about the process, and this year there was very little drama in discussing that, so that's good. However, we are moving towards fair value of all the assets over time. And this year, fortuitously, artworks was due to be revalued anyway for insurance purposes, and so we are utilising that process to revalue them for accounting purposes as well. And you will note that it's quite a substantial revaluation. So we have left it at the original basically cost, in effect 3.4 million for some years, but the number which it has been valued at of 12.3 million, substantially higher, and obviously a much more fair representation of the value of our art collection. So subject to discussion with audit about that, that will be the number that we broadly end up with in the accounts this year. The main discussion with audit is going to be around whether we treat an element of that as a prior period adjustment, because it's quite material. However, that's what you employ me for, the technical discussions around that sort of thing. There's nothing else of great moment to note. I think everything is there, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, and point well made around that consolidation of our accounting policies. And so, Councillor Shannon.
It's always Councillor Piddington, isn't it? My question was actually around the valuation of the art collection and the impact that that would otherwise therefore have on our insurance. And given that, even though of course you're using, the experts are used to value artworks and what have you. It's still, to a degree, subjective, and therefore, as that's reflected in our insurance policies, is there a strategy that's applied, like, for example, anything beneath a certain value, we're not going to insure it, the likelihood of entire collections disappearing, all of that sort of thing? I'm just interested.
Ironically, for the artworks, the insurance has been consistently done and updated over the years. But in broad terms, our insurance has an area of self-insurance in it, and we outline that, I can't remember the number, in the accounts as part of the notes to PP&E. But it is fairly substantial, and my understanding is that insurance is on the table for wider discussion at the moment because of that issue, because there's obviously always going to be a grey area about this is absolutely insured, this is uninsured, and what do we do about the substantial amounts that, if there was an absolute disaster, would need to be insured, but short of that, we'd probably just cover. That's not something that we specifically address in the annual report process, apart from one comment about self-insurance. Insurance is not specifically in my area of management, but we acknowledge that as part of the interaction. Things with the annual report is that we sort of capture quite a wide range of information and then have a picture that goes up for the annual report. So when things like that of significance are noted, Audit New Zealand will often take note of them, and then you'll see comments coming up in the audit statements saying, you guys need to look at this sort of thing. Now, they haven't said that about insurance. I don't know if it's on their radar this year. They have quite a lot of work that they have to do, as you're probably aware from the news reports, and probably won't be looking at insurance. But my understanding is that internally we are considering that.
Thank you. Happy with that? Councillor Whittington?
John, I probably spend too much time on Trade Me, but what about the museum? Do we value the assets of the museum? I see someone was flogging stuff from the British Museum, a few antiquities in the front pocket.
Did you get any?
I think Philip picked up a few things that he's putting up. No, yes, slightly embarrassing that really, wasn't it? But I've been in, actually this year we were discussing that, I was discussing that with Museum Director Philip Howe, and we have a strategy for looking at how we might value it. The problem with museum valuations is that it's difficult to value each piece because most of them are unique to start with, obviously, and also it's about the value to the community is not necessarily the value that's on the market. So unlike most of the British Museum stuff, where you can sell it as an antiquity in and of itself, a lot of our things that we've retained in the museum are there because they're of historical interest to our community. But there are ways of valuing it sort of in a holistic way to say, if you lost it all in a big fire, God willing that doesn't happen, but if that happened, how would you replace the picture that you're presenting to the community of our history? So it's not about buy this thing to replace this thing, it's about the picture that we're presenting. And there are techniques used around the world for doing that, so it's not on this year's agenda, but it certainly is on for next year's agenda.
Awesome. Councillor Pye.
And just on the valuation of the paintings, so I assume that they're not depreciated, and so to replace them, we're just relying on insurance, aren't we? We don't have any savings to replace any artwork, it has to be insurance.
That's correct, yes.
Then I just have one other minor question on that. So we say that there have been no significant changes except for the valuation of the artworks, but in the policies themselves, I think it's number 4 or something, says there's no changes. Do we actually mean that or not? It's not number 4, sorry, there isn't. It says there have been no changes in accounting policy. Do we need to specify except for that valuations there, or is it not significant enough to be noted in there?
This is a matter of debate between accountants and auditors since accounting and auditing was invented back in about the 17th century. The grey area again see, everyone thinks accounting is black and white, but there's lots of grey areas. But we prefer to think of accounting policies and accounting practices, but they all tend to get lumped into the accounting policy statement. So we have a policy of valuing the artworks, which has been in a particular methodology. So we're changing that methodology, but we're not changing the underlying valuation of the artworks. So that will be my argument to audit, but they may disagree, and so we may end up having to say there's been a change. But when we changed the water valuation and the roading valuation, they were happy with the fact that we were changing the methodology rather than an underlying principle of valuing them.
I have another question around the water valuation. Why are we bothering with that if the current government is just going to remove those assets for us anyway? Why? Because I assume that valuation comes at a cost to council. Completing the valuation, I mean.
Well, this year, the original plan was that we would do a triennial valuation, so once every 3 years, and then inflation got a bit high, so we've ended up having to revalue it ever since. And this year, we've agreed with audit that we will not do a full-blown revaluation, but rather revalue based on the indices. So we've got an expert, WARS, who we usually use, to give us the indexed increase, and that's what we're going to be using. So it's relatively cost-free in terms of the valuation itself. However, the wider issue in terms of the Three Waters changes, at this stage, we are expected to treat it just as our asset, regardless of what might happen in that space.
Happy with that? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So it records and presents the value as at 30 June when we still own and control that asset, and the standards require that we present the value in our policy as effectively a fair value of it. So that's why we do it. And in actual fact, we'll have to do it, and if, and I say if because we don't know, but if the current proposal remains, because the government remains, we would have to value it at the point of transfer as well. I expect the auditors would require us to do that then too.
Thank you. Any further questions?
We did know this was the paper you were all waiting for, so we...
Waiting. Excellent. So move in a second, please. Councillor Scott and Councillor Parker. All those in favour? Against, so carried. Thank you. So moving to 7.5, the financial report, July 2023. And on page 52.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mr.
Andrew.
Chair.
Cheers.
So this is the first month that we're into our new financial year. So we're actually tracking behind budget at this point in time, which I guess is a good start to the year. So long may it continue. So not really much to report on. We haven't had to borrow anything this month, which is another good thing. So they've remained stable. So you'll note that the report has taken a slightly different layout and view this year, or this month. So interested for your feedback, whether or not it's a lot simpler to read, or whether there's information that you'd like added to it to make it a bit more user friendly. So up for any feedback.
Any questions as I gaze to my left? Councillor Booth.
Yeah, look, I was just wondering about capital repayments and where and what sort of quantum have we paid back. Obviously, we're borrowing money, so we're collecting rates and it's classed as depreciation, so I presume that money is going towards capital repayments. Can you give me an idea? We're borrowing money flat out. I assume that we're actually paying it back. So can you tell me what we've, can you give me an insight into that, please?
Thank you, Councillor Booth, and through you, Councillor Burt. So what happens is we depreciate in the order, I think in the annual plan, we're depreciating 33 million from memory, and we will spend all of that money in effect on capital work. So we are spending all our depreciation. But we budgeted, and in the last few years we've spent $60–70 million. So there is a gap. That gap is essentially funded by borrowing. So our borrowing goes up. But if you look at the projects, and you saw some of them here, like Downlands and Pariora and so on earlier on, when we do the rate, we include in that rate a repayment of the borrowings. So inside an individual project, the borrowings, the amount we borrowed for that project drops year on year because we're repaying it and it's calculated into our rate. But because we're spending more than our depreciation, our borrowings in total are going up. Does that explain the issue?
Happy with that, Councillor Booth?
I guess I'm just a bit concerned with borrowing money to pay money back. That'd be just.
Maybe I always like to try and give an analogy like a house, because I think that is what a lot of people assume their borrowings for. But if I own a house and I've decided that I've got 500,000 and I'm going to pay back 50,000 a year, that takes me 10,000, and I pay that down 10,000 by 10,000. But if I'm going to go and buy, say, a second or third property, and they might cost me more than that, 750, then my borrowings go up, but I'm still paying down on a particular asset. And then when the rent or the income flows on from those subsequent purchases, they come down as well. So the total borrowings can go up because you're increasing your asset base, but individual projects or assets are getting paid down. That's what's happening here. So we are repaying on our capital that we're investing in, but we're investing in more assets than we have depreciation. We have rated the depreciation for, so we fund that with borrowing.
Yes, Councillor Shannon and then Councillor Pye.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things. On point number 6, that table there, I found it difficult to follow just because there is no headings above each of those columns. But the presentation here really suits the way that I've traditionally looked at all this stuff. I think it's absolutely brilliant. It's like a good old-fashioned P&L, actual against budget, variance to budget, all that sort of good stuff. But right down the end there, which would be useful for me, the year-to-date actual percentage of the full year budget. I'd like to know, is that 8%, for example, is that in line with expectations for this time of year versus previous years and that sort of thing? Because I've got nothing to compare it to. This is just a presentation thing, but I love it. Well done.
Thank you. In regards to the last year, we did put it in. However, it looked a little bit weird because each year is different. So there's not necessarily consistent monthly expenditure. So we thought, well, perhaps we'll, at the 6 monthly mark, then put it in, because essentially we'll have 6 months worth of data, but the months are different. So this year, for example, we were budgeting for a deficit for the month, whereas last year I think it was a profit, of about $2 million. So it's all timing on depending on when things are and how your budget's phased and what your budget looks like. So essentially the budget this year, we're looking for a deficit, whereas last year we were looking for positive. So there's going to be a big gap, and so there's not necessarily an explanation as, well, why was it positive last year versus negative essentially this year. So we thought, well, we'll revisit that again in 6 months' time and just see what that looks like. In regards to point 6, essentially each of the different columns are representing different scenarios as to where we might be if we took out our unguaranteed revenue. So the top line is our budgeted revenue, that we're forecast for this financial year. And then essentially the first column is if we receive all of our revenue that we expected to receive in the financial year, essentially that's our best case scenario. We get all our revenue and that's our headroom as to where we can borrow. But if you essentially look at the third column, that's worst case scenario. So essentially we've taken out interest and we've got no subsidies or grants come in, therefore our adjusted revenue would ultimately drop down to 99 million. So our headroom for our borrowings is less. So the most likely column, or not the most likely column, but potentially the last column, because is the Waka Kotahi funding is guaranteed. So essentially we've added that back to the subsidies and grants. So that column 4 is probably a more realistic potential position based on what we may or may not receive. So it was just to give that sort of broad range of where we could land.
Councillor Pye.
I just actually want to say I didn't get my calculator out reading this report. Maybe because it was only 1 month's of data and not so many variances, but well done on making all the changes that we have been requesting. It is a far better report in my mind, and that table with the available, the headroom is really useful, and I look forward to it progressing throughout the year, so thank you very much.
Any further questions? It's always good in a Commission on Strategy meeting to go from stop the madness to well done, and I love it. Absolutely. It's been a benchmark for me, and I think thank you very much. Thank you very much. No further questions. Someone like to move and second that? Yeah. Councillor Booth and Mayor Bowen, thank you. All those in favour? Against, so carried. Thank you. So moving to paper 7.6, Council Investments and Borrowings on page 70.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is basically just a cover report to note the Bancorp report that we have already discussed with Miles O'Connor at the workshop on the 29th of August. So it's an information only and a noted report.
Expecting any questions on this, are we? Someone like to move a note. Seconder, Councillor Parker over here. Thank you. So Mayor Bowen and Councillor Parker, all those in favour? Against, so moved. And moving to a bad debts write-off, so that's all happened. Welcome, Leanne. We're always very, very committed and gentle to those who have their first presentation with us. I'm making that as a general, everybody. Much appreciated. Thank you.
So yeah, bad debts written report. So the 3 points I'd like to leave with you today. Firstly, we have a robust process for debt recovery in place now. Secondly, we are actively developing a debt recovery policy as part of the LTP process. And thirdly, it is our intention to provide a similar report on a quarterly basis so that you are in a position where there's transparency between ourselves and the councillors.
Fantastic. Excellent. Any discussion around that? Councillor Pillington.
Just a couple of things. Do we have a minimum value we can write off without you guys having, there's an amount there for $1.22. Cost you more than that to write $1.22. And the second question is, are we more robust now? And I know it's back a few years, but someone hired the stadium on 4 different occasions over about 5 months and didn't pay for any of them. Surely if they don't pay, we stop people using facilities.
Great question, Councillor Piddington. Now that we do have our finger on the pulse, essentially, I feel like my team will certainly be in a position that you won't have a quarterly report like this to review. It will only get better. And I think with engaging with our debt recovery stakeholder, they will be actively working harder for us as well. Yeah.
Councillor Pye?
Sorry, just to follow up, and you may not be able to answer this, but how does, if we've got our new online bookable system, do you put a flag in the system that kind of goes, sorry, you can't book the stadium?
Can I through you, Mr Chair? So I don't think we're actually across that yet. It's part of those further phases, but I can speak from experience about how well informed our staff and the revenue team are to potential recidivisous offenders, and so that we will be working with the user experience team to make sure that we have the right processes in place.
Excellent. Any further questions? Thank you. So we're going to move basically into PX for some more detail on those. So we'll just remove, I suppose, move a note. Thank you, Councillor Shannon and Councillor Pye. All those in favour? Against? So moved. So we have no urgent business or minor nature. So we'll move into exclusion of the public. Thank you, your Mayor, Worship Mayor, and Councillor Pillington. All those in favour? Against? So moved.